I'm Jack Gilles, part of the Ecumenical Institute, ICA, the Order, and I live presently in Mexico. But I'm working primarily on the archives of our history and so on. And I want to tell you a story. And the story is very personal in the sense that it's something that happened to me. And it has to do with doing the impossible. In the early years in the 70s, I was part of a network supporting the ICA. They were called the Guardians, and which meant that we were simply employed someplace else, but we were helping the Institute in some of its finances and some of its opening doors and this kind of thing. When Joe Mathews, the dean, was in Cleveland, where I was working, and he was busy raising money for the renovation work on this building. When we first got it, of course, we had to put in a hallway, all of the structure that converting an office building into a residential and so on. So he was visiting people, and I heard that he was in town and got a call, and I just wanted to go see Joe. And I went to see him, and along with him was a couple in our organization called Joe Tomaz and Joy Tomaz, who were there to help raise the money. So I go to lunch just thinking, I'm just going to get a chance to be with Joe. Well, you just don't go and be with Joe. And there we're sitting there, and he turns to me, and he said, "Gilles, who do you know who can give us $10,000? Well, now this was 1975, so today it would be probably more like, who can give us $50,000? I said, "Joe, I don't know anybody." I said, I don't travel in those circles. I'm just, at that time I was a research scientist. Well, Joe, he turned to me again. He said, "Gilles, who do you know who can give us $10,000? And I said, "Joe, I don't know anybody. The only rich person I know is in my hometown, which is in western Pennsylvania. And her husband, she's a widow, and her husband invented the zipper, Talon zipper. Gideon Sunback was his name, and she was Mrs. Sunback." I said, "She's the only rich person that and I've never met her. I just know that she went to my church." And he said, "Well, why don't you see if we can see her?" Well, I didn't know what to do. I said, "Well, let me call my mother." So I called my mother. I said, "We would like to go visit Mrs. Sunbeck. Do you think I could come over there and this evening and visit her?" It's about an hour and a half away. So she called back and said she would see us. She said, "But she has been supporting the Institute." I knew she had. And he said, "I already have a check written for them, and they needn't come over to pick it up." And so I said, "We'll come. We want to talk to her anyhow." So we went over, we had dinner with my mother, and then about 7:30 we went over to this lady's home. Well, she was in her 80s, so she was no spring chicken. And Joe began to talk to her and gave the pitch of our work in Fifth City and so on and so forth. And I'm sitting there on the couch, and Joe's there talking to her, and she's smiling, and then I notice she's drifting off, "Yeah, okay," and then she would drift off again. He would raise his voice. So it was clearly she was just being polite and listening, and Joe was giving this spirited missional talk about what we were doing around the world and so on and so forth. And when it was all done, so he said, we would really like to, ask you to support us. She said, "Well, I told Jack's mother that I've already written a check for you, and I'll be glad to go get it to you, but it's for $50. At which point, something snapped inside of me. And I said, "Mrs. Sunbeck," I said, "we can get $50 from anybody." I said, "God has been good to you, and I know what you've done for our church, and I know she was behind funding for the restoration of the market house in town." I said, "You have done a lot for this town. And it's time that you got a chance to do something for the world and support us. And I said, quite frankly, as I said, we can give $50 a minute. We need people who give $5,000 or $10,000. Well, she was awake at that point. And she started to say, well, I suppose, you know, and then she finally said, well, I think I could be one of those $5,000 gifts. At which point, without missing a beat, Joe says, can we pray? And boom, he was down on his knees. And he was giving thanks for her gift and what it meant. And when we got back in our seat, she said, you know, I think I'll be one of those 10,000 people. And she went and got her checkbook and wrote out a check for $10,000. Joe and I drove back to Cleveland, and Joe was asleep in the motel. It was about 11:30, 12 o'clock when we got back. And I'll never forget knocking on the door and Joe coming to the door, and I handed him the check and I said, here's your $10,000. So that was just the miracle of what it means to just act, that you can do it. Yeah. Well, with this $10,000, it was going to add to the pool of money that we needed to enable this, at that point, the Kemper building, which was given to us, but it was a shell. You know, there was very few enclosed spaces. This was floor after floor of open desk areas. So when all of those, in fact, the desks, I don't know if anybody's going to talk about that story, but when we moved in here, there was no way to divide the rooms where people slept. And so we piled desks on top of each other and made rooms out of big metal industrial desks where all the accountants would sit and all the actuaries would sit and claim agents and all that. You know, there was just 8 floors of desks, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of desks that we made into rooms. And so the question was, how do we create walls and space and doors and architecture? And it was a fairly expensive task to do that, and we were in the process of getting the money for that task, and as well as the money that was going to service our work around the world in the institute. But anyhow, that was what we were trying to get the money for.